Hello and thank you for joining us on Zambia Today program. I'm your host, Faith Katai. On 16th March 2026, during the third cabinet meeting, the Zambian cabinet approved a significant policy change, the extension of business and operating hours. Under this new directive, business houses, markets and bus stations will now be permitted to operate 24 hours a day, marking a major shift aimed at boosting economic activity and improving service delivery across the country. And so on Zambia Today, we are focusing on Cabinet's resolution for the implementation of a 24/7 economy. To help us discuss this topic, in the studio, I'm joined by Mr. Bona Kachinga, a seasoned finance professional, economist, property developer, and former banker with over 17 years of experience. Sir, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
We are delighted to have you in the Zani studios.
Thank you. Pleasure to return.
Sure.
Thank you.
So just to begin with, would like you to make us understand, Cabinet approved 24-hour economy. What does this mean for the country?
I think for the country, this is essentially a call to enhance productivity through round-the-clock, production of goods and services and trading of the same. Second, it's also a departure from the traditional classification of daylight time as working hours to the more demand-driven flex working over a 24-hour cycle. I think third, it's a signal that Zambia is aiming to become a regional, continental, and global hub, perhaps covering production, trade, logistics, travel and transit, and also call center and business process outsourcing. And then lastly, I think for me, this is actually a signal that Zambia is giving that it's willing to be able to allocate a higher capital base to production and to also be able to lower the cost and barriers to doing business in a significant and fundamental way. You don't go with a 24-hour, economy when you intend to be able to operate on, status quo, business as usual. So this is a fundamental signal we're sending out to the world.
Great.
Yeah.
From your perspective as an economist, what are the major benefits to this kind of a model?
Well, there are a couple of things. I think the first one, of course, what we call first mover advantages for the nation, for firms that operate in the nation, and also for households. In economics, we talk of first mover advantages, meaning essentially the advantages that are available to an agent or a player that acts faster than the rest of the market. So here we're talking of the possibility and potential for market capture of value through increased wallets from possible doubling of production and trade volumes. This has to be driven by economic activities that follow the pronouncement of the 24-hour economy. What that gives us the opportunity of is to differentiate ourselves from markets around us, from nations around us, from firms operating in those markets and households. When others are sleeping within the SADC region, we will be open for business to be able to provide value, to be able to ensure that trade can be able to go on and commerce. That is a key one. The second issue, I think, is the expanded convenience of continuous commerce. Anytime, will be business time. Within the Republic. There's a saying, I think, in one of the movies, "Money never sleeps." This probably has its meaning within a 24-hour economy. Commerce will be expected to be thriving, whether day or night. Nighttime is usually considered to be unproductive time when people are slowing down. But we should be having other people who are actually picking up and starting a new cycle of commerce, whether that is retailing, whether that is broadcasting services to be able to provide information to the public about goods and services that are out there. The other issue, I think, is positive pass-through effects on livelihoods and social capital. When you undergo the policy shift to a 24-hour economy, you have to be able to build infrastructure that supports that. By definition, some of that has to be support services that will essentially impact livelihoods and social capital. You will have to be able to step up on security in the country to ensure that people can be able to move at night without possibilities of crime. If you walk into some cities in Africa, including Kigali, not too far from here, you can walk through their CBD at midnight and nothing will happen to you. We had those days. We still have some pockets of the country where you can do that. This needs to spread across the entire country. Police services must be 24 hours, not just the ones that have to do with traffic and so on, but every form of police service that is required. Transportation services also have to be operating on a 24 hours basis, and here we need to be able to pick up on public transportation, to be very specific. If you have a commuter train that moves across the city or cities, makes it much more easy for one operator to be able to essentially transport thousands of people, and so that becomes the most efficient transportation system you can have, especially in the night time. The other issue, I think, is enhanced education and training infrastructure. You will, by choice, going with this particular policy and the shift that will happen in various laws and regulation, need to be able to ensure that training and education happens around the clock. There will be people who will be waking up in the middle of the night, and if they need to be able to enhance their capacities through a short training session, that should be able to happen. So providers of such things need to be able to pull up their socks. The other issue is round the clock health services. Health services should be available not just for emergency issues, but for every form of ailment that will plague an employee or a worker in the middle of the night, and that has to be available. So all of these feed into the social capital infrastructure. It means that society overall is going to actually have a huge benefit coming to them. The other one is positive, I think, transformational through emergency of self-service and artificial intelligence systems. We will need to operate a lot of autonomous 24/7, 365 systems that can be able to provide services on a self help basis. Whether these are airport kiosks to be able to print out your departure tickets, to check yourself into a plane. Whether these are, for example, self-service fuel stations where you can go into a fuel station, load fuel into your vehicle and pay for it, and so on. And so a lot of trust has to be able to go up in a society like that one, to ensure that people getting self-service services are paying for them. That's the currency that would be expected. Also, a lot of AI, customer attendants to be able to answer your call, even if you are talking to a bot and so on, and deal with basic queries and so on. The other issue is 24 hours call centers, business processes, outsourcing, and also perhaps driverless autonomous vehicles. You expect that in an economy like that one, you are coming to work, Zanis, you should be able to decide whether you want to be able to get into a manned vehicle or an autonomous one. You jump in, and so this is actually the beginning of the economy that pulls on more resources other than human beings, and you have to be able to go with autonomous options. I think also what we would be seeing is the emergency of 24 hours shared economy, shared offices, shared rides, bikes. What you actually find in the first world, you can jump on a motorbike which is not yours, park it somewhere at a defined zone outside of ZNBC. Someone else will pick it up. They are going to Kablonga. They will leave it in Kablonga at the designated zone. Someone else will pick it, will go with it to Kafue. And that speaks to the fact that whoever actually owns that asset doesn't require it 24 hours. They probably need it for 5-8 hours, and they are willing that anyone else can be able to use it for the rest of the day.
Wow.
So that actually takes us into that particular area. Other issues, I mean, for us in Landsworth, which is the company I run with, are opportunities for what we call truck turnaround last mile services. If a truck has come from South Africa and they have brought equipment that is required by a mine mining client, they don't need to be able to wait until they're given, you know, clearance into the mine. They can be able to drive into a 24 hours, you know, a warehouse that operates, you know, a turnaround service, either leave, you know, the trailer, or everything is offloaded off their trailer, and someone else does the last mile into the mine. That just enables them to be able to turn around immediately. We also, you know, looking at the emergence of a huge freelance industry of consultants and service providers. Companies will no longer need to be able to employ everyone on payroll, but you can have freelance, you know, consultants, either doing your marketing in the middle of the night whilst you're sleeping. They prepare what is required and so on, and so forth. The other issue, I think, is about smart and collaborative, you know, working. It will force us, you know, to be able to see the emergence of joint ventures, service partnerships, business alliances, expanding of franchise opportunities, and an increase actually in probably public-private partnerships with, you know, private sector beginning to lean in more into assisting the public sector, you know, deal with routine, soft, you know, tasks such as applications for and, you know, issuance of licenses, you know, filling forms, returns, and even, you know, customer service management in some, you know, government departments. The other issue also is the need for an increase in public-private partnership for hard infrastructure provision, especially those that are required to ensure that trade, logistics, and commerce can happen. You are talking of, you know, the quick building of our one-stop border posts, you know, managing those, you know, border assets, including, you know, economic border zones that need to be able to come up very quickly. Also expanding road, you know, infrastructure. And the quality of those roads, which should include truck parks, warehousing, inland, you know, bonded warehouses, and also 24/7 customer, you know, clearance of you know, goods that are going through, you know, the borders. Also, in addition to that, I think having a 24 hours, you know, visa processing services and immigration services, these would be critical. The other bit, I think, which will be necessary is the energy industry shift to a 24 hours, you know, power supply cycle. It's important that this, you know, is dealt with, and I think with the opening up of the energy sector, we are, you know, we are poised to be able to capture the benefits of a 24 hours economy. There is nothing more drastic, you know, difficult than having a 24-hour economy but not having power. You know, on a 24 hours basis. Wow. The other one, I think, is the last, actually, is, you know, security services shift to all-day services. And here we're talking of enhanced, you know, security services across the country, day and night, from borders, country, city, to town. And here we're talking of, you know, high-value border locations, your Kazungula, Chirundu, your, you know, your Kipushi, Kasumbalesa, Kambimba, Jimbe, Nakonde, Mpulungu Haba, and so on. These are high-value border points that need to have the requisite security to be able to ensure that our neighbors can be able to come into Zambia any time of day, do their trading, and if they need to be back in their country by the opening of their markets in the morning, they are actually exiting and going through, and so on. This requires for us to be able to, you know, increase military infrastructure in these particular locations.
Okay, before we come to that one, maybe we can talk about now. There are a lot of benefits that you have mentioned, yes. How should labor laws, wages, and worker protection evolve to support this kind of an economy, 24-hour economy?
Yeah, so I think a few things are already in place, which is right, under the Employment Code Act. One, ensuring of mandatory rest days and also hours. I think presently the Employment Code Act does provide for an employee to have 1 day of rest, you know, within a week. that needs to be protected, that needs to be preserved. But also there may be need to be able to actually stipulate, minimum rest that an employee should be able to have, within a day. Perhaps, anything between 8 to 10 hours. If there are those who want to be able to, have multiple joys, why not? It's really up to them. The other issue is, clear rules around overtime, perhaps being hours that go beyond 10 hours. Of work. The other issue I think is strengthening rules around workplace, wellness and health support. You want for a workplace to be able to have, a wellness support and health support that a person can be able to get any time of day, whether that is, some basic counseling and so on. I think also we need to have, the revamping of NEMA to be able to adequately anchor and support the health sector through a 24-hour cycle. And that means, NEMA coming back in the form that it was before, the recent pause, being able to honor obligations and, being able to be available on a call center basis to answer, queries about whether candidate A or patient A is actually NEMA affiliated. That must happen 24 hours and so on. The other one I think is the possibility of a reduced probationary period for employees, perhaps to 2 months, extended 4 months for an employee. If you imagine the fact that we are increasing the daytime work, or rather the daily work of an employee, perhaps to something like 10 hours. That is, 2 hours above, what we typically work, which is an 8-hour day. So we would be expecting that even that translates into the reduction in the probation that people should be able to be subjected to. The last one, I think, is also, mandated local content regulations across all key sectors. If we leave this porous and only, capture the mining sector, which is what has moved first on local content regulation, and also the public sector, actually, I think they were first in August, passing a local content regulation. If we don't include other sectors, what would happen is that, companies will cherry pick. If they think, they can get production done in another 24-hour economy, could be, any of our neighboring countries. It will go into the neighboring countries. It might even go overseas. So what you want to do is to protect Zambian employees. We need to be able to mandate local content, regulations across.
Great. Mr. Kachenga, in terms of trade, how is the 24-hour economy change Zambia's position in terms of global trade?
Well, I think a couple of ways. One, of course, accelerated land-linked program for Zambia to connect the whole country across all the 9 borders. This is essential. It will force us, it will accelerate this particular program to ensure that, we connect every part of our borders with our 9 countries, Burundi over the Great Lakes being the 9th. Those road projects that are taking us into the Nakara corridor need to move faster. The Kipushi, Solwezi Road needs to move faster. I think the president during Youth Day celebrations mentioned that the works start immediately after the rain season. The Kambimba Road project, by Sandstone from, Lumwana west to, Kambimba border connecting us to the Kolwezi, needs to also move faster. Same with, the entire road from, Kalumbila all the way to Jimbe border with Angola, and the rest of the projects, including the Kasomena Mwenda Road project connecting us to DRC and Tanzania. Those projects all need to accelerate very quickly, because what we want is not just trade within the country, not just economic activity with it, but also facilitating that for our neighbors, that we would be the fastest transit point for the region. I think it also for us provides the opportunity to be able to rightly classify ourselves as being open for business 24/7, 365 days, and to be able to ensure that core and support services would be available to ensure that the economy is running during every part of the day. The other issue also is enhancing. I think I'd covered that. Our security services shift to an all-day services. That's your border security, that's your immigration, that's your military, operations in our border areas, policing across the country, and so on. I think one would fairly say that within the short term, one way to respond is actually to go into tapping what I would call those volunteer resources. RATSA perhaps needs to be able to rethink bringing back the honorary inspector positions to be able to recruit as many. Zambia police needs to be able to look into the honorary police, they were called the reserve police, I think, and so on. You have to be able to bring in a lot of these resources within the short period of time, because training a young policeman from the time they leave grade 12 to become a policeman is roughly not less than a year, perhaps more than that. But being able to bring back somebody who can take a voluntary role as an honorary inspector or reserve police, not a problem. Being able to also recall some people who have put themselves out of employment, perhaps because of 55 years retirement, is something that we need to actually be able to consider. You see that some economies actually go towards extending the retirement age, because you need those people who are still energetic, they still have life in them, rather than them sitting at home. They can actually become part of those people that are needed for education and training, to be able to provide skills, capacity training for an economy that has actually just doubled by simply just shifting hours of the day. I think the last one, is shrinking the business time, or rather actually expanding business time in Zambia by about 7%. If you look at the fact that this particular policy moves us to gain at least 12 to 14 hours of working time, for trade players, that's a 67% increase right there. That is very easily a doubling of the economy. We need to be able to ensure that we take advantage of this. It actually helps us to offset the disadvantages of being a land-locked country. We can become the hub and the country of choice for transiting, for production, for a lot of goods and services. Yeah.
Okay, so as we are coming to the end of the program, are there lessons that Zambia can learn, like other countries where Zambia can learn from being successfully implementing this 24-hour economy?
Yeah, I think there are quite a number. The World Economic Forum estimates that there are about 80 cities in the world that operate on a 24-hour cycle. That means there are quite a number of countries that have gone with this. Within our region, we've got Tanzania that is experimenting with this in specific towns. And the last I checked, there was excitement, thumbs up that this was the right way to go. Ghana has also moved, into a 24-hour economy. Critical, what we can be able to learn from there, is simply, I think, part of what I've indicated. You need to be able to very quickly revamp your security services sector. You need to be able to revamp your transportation, services sector. You need to be able to revamp commerce, whether that is self-service or manned, services, where a person needing a meal at midnight would not become, a needle in the haystack. You would be able to find, providers of food services anywhere. As Landsworth, we already operate some of our business, entities in that 24-hour cycle, because we operate, hospitality, which is lodges, hotels, and that already fits within that particular, segment. You need to be able to ensure that the information cycle also operates on a 24 hours, including transmission of parcels. So courier services need to be able to continue with that. The other issue is certain forms of money will still be hard cash. So you need, cash in transit services to be able to move, collecting money, and so on, and moving it into, the banking system and so on. So these, I think, are some of, the key lessons that are there. But overall, I think it's the preparedness of human capital to be able to embrace the opportunity and look at, how we can be able to maximize value, how we can become, centers of excellence in specific issues that, as Zambia, we are good at. I think those are some of the lessons we can pick from the region.
Okay. Lastly, Mr. Kashinga, what indicators should Zambia track over the 3 to 5 years to determine whether the 24-hour economy is actually working?
Well, I mean, we want to see GDP numbers certainly going up. Anything less than, a double-digit growth would be very suspicious. So we need to be able to see, our GDP numbers going up above, 10% and so on, because by default, we'll be going into a situation where we're producing 24 hours. You expect that, a few things should happen. Treasury revenues, whether through ZRA collections and so on, collections through other agencies of government, will go up by, sheer volumes and not necessarily by increasing, those particular ones. I think the business sector is looking towards, consolidating licensing into single licenses and so on, and quicker turnaround times. The other, I think, key performance, attribute we can be able to look at is our connectivity. Connectivity as measured through many things, including road connectivity, telephone connectivity, should reflect the fact that we will be doing more connections, whether by way of people moving across the borders and progressing inland, doing their business. So that it will translate into a key performance indicator that we can track. Then the expansion of the road network by default needs to be able to go up. Presently, our road network is pretty much built for the current economy that we have. We need an economy that connects us to all the borders, even some that have not been spoken of. So there is that. The other issue, I think, is human capital indices that we need to be able to track. More skills are required, towards freelance, consultancy, people and so on. The entire education sector needs to reflect, an increase in the human capital that they are being able to churn out and train. So I think those are some of the key indicators I would be looking at. One would be hoping that also when we look at energy, we would be talking of us having overcome load shedding one way or other, and that we are in an energy sufficiency environment, if you like.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kashinga, for coming through to Zambia today.
Thank you very much. The pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Viewers, that's all we had for you on Zambia today. This has been Faith Katai. Goodbye.